In the remote heart of the Rocky Mountains, 6 friends on a long-overdue camping trip were about to discover something buried beneath decades of silence. A week of peaceful hiking turned to terror when they unearthed a forgotten journal beneath the roots of an ancient pine. Its final entry a desperate warning. Noah Carter wasn't just another outdoor enthusiast. For years he had chased the ghosts of these mountains, searching for answers about his father's disappearance, an obsession that had made him a seasoned survivalist, known for tracking where others got lost. When the first whispers began in the night and their footprints failed to lead back the way they came, the group had no idea they were already caught in something much older than the journal's ink. Noah's instincts kicked in, piecing together the signs, but what he found would shake even him. What began as a nostalgic retreat would become a desperate fight for survival. The mountains had always kept their secrets, but this time, they had chosen their witnesses. And by reading the journal, the 6 friends had sealed their fate. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy of pine, trees, painting dappled patterns on the forest floor as Noah Carter adjusted his backpack straps. He paused, taking in the pristine mountain vista, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders with each breath of crisp, alpine air. "This is it," he announced, rotating slowly to face his 5 companions. Perfect spot. Flat ground close to the stream and just enough tree cover. He dropped his pack with a satisfying thud. Home sweet home for the next week. Jake Holloway was already shrugging off his backpack, his perpetual energy undiminished by the 6-hour hike. "About damn time. I was starting to think we'd be walking until nightfall." He stretched dramatically. "Though I've got to admit, Carter, you weren't lying about this place. The clearing was ideal. A natural opening in the dense Rocky Mountain forest flanked by ancient pines and a babbling stream that curled around its eastern edge. It was remote enough that they hadn't seen another soul since leaving the trailhead that morning. Noah's dad knew all the best spots," Marcus Reed said, carefully setting down his meticulously packed gear. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, surveying the area with scientific precision. "The coordinates you gave me match perfectly with what I'd calculated as the optimal camping location in this region." Olivia Brooks snorted as she dropped her pack. "Only you would calculate the optimal camping location, Reed." She pulled her dark hair into a ponytail, eyes sharp as they scanned the clearing. "Though I'll admit, for once the reality matches the hype. This place is stunning." Emily Vasquez approached more slowly, taking careful steps, her face upturned to catch the sunlight streaming through the trees. "It feels peaceful here," she said softly. "Like the forest is welcoming us." She knelt to touch the ground, her nurse's hands gentle against the earth. Sophie Langley was the last to enter the clearing, her movements unhurried, almost dreamlike. Her eyes were distant, as if seeing beyond the physical space. "There's old energy here," she murmured, more to herself than to the others. "This place has stories to tell." Noah clapped his hands together. "All right, let's get camp set up before we lose the light. Jake and Marcus, help me with the tents. Liv, you and Emily sort out the food supplies. Sophie, can you get the fire pit going?" The group fell into their tasks with the easy rhythm of old friendships, occasionally punctuated by laughter or good-natured ribbing. It had been 3 years since they'd all been together like this, life pulling them in different directions. After college, this trip was Noah's attempt to recapture what they'd once had, to reconnect in a way that wasn't possible through text messages and social media. As the sun began its descent behind the jagged mountain peaks, their camp took shape. 3 two-person tents formed a semicircle around a neatly constructed fire pit, where flames now danced cheerfully. Dinner preparations were underway, with Emily chopping vegetables on a portable cutting board, while Liv organized their supplies. "Hard to believe it's been 3 years," Marcus said, joining Noah by the fire after securing the last tent stake. "Feels like yesterday we were all crammed into that apartment senior year." Noah nodded, his eyes reflective. "That's why we needed this. No distractions, no phones, just us and the mountains." He didn't say what they all knew, that his obsession with the outdoors had only intensified after his father disappeared on a solo hike when Noah was 16. These mountains were as much about chasing ghosts as they were about reconnecting with friends. Speaking of distractions, Liv called out, "Has anyone seen Jake? He was supposed to be collecting more firewood, but he's been gone for 20 minutes. As if summoned by her words, Jake burst through the trees at the edge of the clearing, his face flushed with excitement. He was clutching something to his chest. "Guys, you're not going to believe what I found," he announced, striding into the center of camp. Twigs and leaves clung to his clothes, suggesting he'd been crawling around in the underbrush. "Look at this." He held out his discovery. A weathered leather-bound book, its cover darkened with age and streaked with dirt. The binding was frayed at the edges, and what had once been a clasp now hung broken. "A book?" Liv raised an eyebrow. "You're this excited about some old book?" "Not just any book," Jake insisted, brushing off the remaining dirt. "It's a journal. I found it buried under the roots of that fallen spruce about 50 yards west. It was like deliberately hidden." His eyes gleamed with the thrill of discovery. "And it's old. Really old." Emily approached cautiously, drawn by curiosity but hesitant. "How did you even find it?" Jake grinned. "I was looking for the perfect branch to use as a walking stick, and I saw this weird depression under the tree roots. Started digging around and boom, hidden treasure." He opened the journal carefully, revealing yellowed pages covered in tight, spidery handwriting. "Someone went to a lot of trouble to hide this thing. May I?" Sophie extended her hands and Jake passed her the journal. Her slender fingers traced the leather cover with reverence. "This has been out here for years. Decades, maybe." The group gathered around as Sophie gently opened the journal to its first page. The handwriting was neat but cramped, as if the writer had been trying to conserve space. "May 7th, 1978, Sophie read aloud. "Finally made it to the high country. The winter melt has left the trails muddy, but the solitude is worth every difficult step. These mountains have a silence you can feel in your bones. I've set up camp near the old lightning-struck pine as marked on my map. Should be about 3 days' hike from the nearest ranger station. Perfect isolation." 1978? Marcus leaned closer, adjusting his glasses. "That's over 40 years ago." "Keep reading," Jake urged, his usual restlessness momentarily subdued by genuine interest. Sophie turned the page. "May 9th. Strange dreams last night. Woke several times thinking I heard movement outside my tent. Nothing there when I checked, but in the morning, I found unusual tracks at the edge of my camp. Too large for a deer, too round for a bear. Must investigate further tomorrow." The sun had nearly set now, casting long shadows across the clearing. The fire's warmth felt suddenly more necessary as Sophie continued reading, her voice dropping slightly. May 10th. The feeling of being watched persists. Spent the day hiking the eastern ridge but cut my exploration short. Something feels off. The forest is too quiet. No bird calls this afternoon. No squirrels. Just silence and that prickling sensation at the back of my neck. Emily hugged herself, rubbing her arms as if chilled despite the fire's warmth. "I don't know if we should be reading this," she said softly. "It feels invasive." "It's just some old journal," Liv countered, though her journalist's curiosity was clearly piqued. "Probably a dramatic hiker with an overactive imagination. These woods are full of wildlife. Anyone camping alone would get spooked." Sophie turned another page. May 12th, it's getting closer. Whatever it is, it's been circling my camp each night. The tracks are more numerous, always leading toward my tent, never away. I tried to follow them this morning, but they simply ended, as if whatever made them vanished into thin air. I'm breaking camp tomorrow. Something isn't right here. The fire crackled loudly, causing Emily to jump. Noah noticed her discomfort and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Last entry," Sophie said, her finger tracing down to where the neat handwriting became increasingly erratic, the words pressing harder into the page. "May 13th. I can feel it watching me as I write this. It's no animal. The whispers started at sunset. Words I almost recognize but can't quite understand. I'm afraid to sleep. Afraid to look outside my tent. The rangers were right about this area. I should have listened. If anyone finds this journal, get out. It knows you're reading this. The entry ended in a wild scrawl that trailed off the page. In the silence that followed, the fire popped loudly, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkening sky. For a long moment, no one spoke. Jake broke the tension with a forced laugh. Well, that's dramatic. It's a hoax, Liv declared firmly. Some elaborate prank to scare hikers. People do this kind of thing all the time. I don't know, Marcus said thoughtfully. The aging of the paper and ink seems consistent with a journal from the late 70s. And why bury it if it's just a prank? Maybe to make it more convincing when someone eventually found it, Liv countered. Noah took the journal from Sophie, examining it carefully. The rangers being right about this area, that's interesting. My dad used to mention that some parts of these mountains had peculiar reputations, areas hikers avoided. Sophie nodded slowly. Indigenous peoples often had stories about certain places, spiritual boundaries, places where the veil between worlds was thin. Liv rolled her eyes. Here we go with the ghost stories. I think it's creepy, Emily said quietly. The way it ends so abruptly. That's the whole point, Liv insisted. It's designed to be creepy. Someone put a lot of effort into this little horror story and buried it for some future camper to find. Congratulations, Jake. You're the lucky winner. Jake grinned, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. What can no? I say, I've always had a knack for finding trouble. He took the journal back from Noah. Maybe there's more. The rest of the pages are blank, but he flipped through until something caught his eye. Wait, there's something written on the very last page. He turned to it, holding the journal close to the firelight. There, in the same handwriting, as the entries but bolder, larger, was a single line. It knows you're reading this. The words hung in the air, made almost tangible by the flickering firelight. A cold breeze suddenly swept through the clearing, causing the flames to dance wildly for a moment. Okay, that's enough creepy bedtime stories, Noah said firmly, taking the journal and closing it. Let's eat dinner and talk about tomorrow's hike. We've got a full week ahead of us. The group moved on to other topics as they prepared and ate their meal, but the mood had subtly shifted. Conversation was more subdued, laughs a little too loud, as if to compensate for the unease the journal had introduced. Later, as they sat around the fire drinking hot chocolate spiked with whiskey from Jake's flask, the journal lay forgotten by Noah's pack. The night was unusually still. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, no distant owl calls, just the crackle of their fire and their own voices, which had grown quieter as the night deepened. Anyone else notice how quiet it is? Marcus asked during a lull in conversation. That's the beauty of being this remote, Noah replied. No traffic noise, no city hum. No, I mean it's too quiet, Marcus insisted. No wildlife sounds at. Oh, that's unusual. Emily's eyes widened slightly, her gaze darting to the darkness beyond their fire. Like in the journal, the forest is too quiet, it said. Oh, come on, Liv scoffed. Now you're just letting that fake journal get to you. Maybe, Sophie said, her voice dreamy, yet somehow more alert than usual. Or maybe it found exactly who it was meant to find. What's that supposed to mean? Jake asked, an edge to his voice that betrayed his affected nonchalance. Sophie shrugged, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Some things are drawn to attention, to awareness. By reading it, acknowledging it, perhaps we've invited something to notice us. That's ridiculous, Liv declared, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. Noah stood up abruptly. I think we could all use some sleep. Long day tomorrow if we want to reach the ridge by noon. The group dispersed to their tents, Noah sharing with Marcus, Jake with Emily, and Liv with Sophie. The fire was carefully extinguished, plunging the camp into darkness broken only by the pale moonlight filtering through the trees. Hours later, as his friends slept deeply around him, Noah lay awake, listening to the profound silence of the forest. Not even the wind stirred. It was as if the woods were holding their breath, waiting. Shifting carefully to avoid waking Marcus, Noah reached for his flashlight and slipped out of the tent. The night air was cold against his face as he swept the beam of light across their campsite, checking that everything was secure. The light caught something at the edge of their camp, just beyond where the firelight would have reached. Noah approached cautiously, his breath catching as the beam illuminated a single footprint pressed into the soft earth. It was large, oddly shaped, with no distinct toe markings or heel, just a rounded depression that wasn't there when they had set up camp. A footprint that led toward their tents but with no matching track leading away. Noah felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck as he remembered the journal's words. The tracks are more numerous, always leading toward my tent, never away. He quickly retreated to his tent, zipping it firmly closed behind him. As he lay back down, heart pounding, the silence of the forest was finally broken by a sound, the soft rustle of pages turning, as if someone, or something, was leafing through the forgotten journal left beside his pack outside. Noah froze. His breath caught in his throat. The sound of rustling pages stopped abruptly, as if whatever was handling the journal had sensed his awareness. He strained his ears in the oppressive silence, willing his heart to quiet its thunderous beating. It was just the wind, he told himself, though he knew there hadn't been so much as a breeze all night. He considered waking Marcus, but hesitated. What would he say? That he was spooked by an old journal and imaginary sounds? Instead, Noah eased back into his sleeping bag, clutching his flashlight like a talisman, and waited for dawn, his eyes fixed on the tent's entrance. Morning arrived with merciful normality. Bird song, gentle sunlight filtering through the trees, the smell of pine and earth. Noah emerged from his tent, immediately checking where he'd seen the footprint. It was still there, its edges slightly more defined in the morning light. He quickly scuffed it away with his boot before anyone else could see it. The journal lay exactly where it had been left the night before, closed and seemingly untouched. Noah picked it up, weighing it in his hand before tucking it deep into his backpack. "Coffee's almost ready," Marcus called from where he was kneeling by the freshly rekindled fire. His glasses reflected the dancing flames as he carefully tended the camping percolator. "You look like you didn't sleep well." Noah ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Just excited about the trip, I guess." Marcus gave him a knowing look. "Nothing to do with that creepy journal, then?" Before Noah could answer, Jake emerged from his tent, stretching dramatically. "Morning, campers. Who's ready for another thrilling day in the great outdoors?" His voice carried its usual bravado, but Noah noticed the slight shadows under his eyes. One by one, the others joined them around the fire. Emily looked particularly tired, her usual warm smile strained at the edges. She sat close to the fire, hugging her knees to her chest as if cold despite the morning warmth. "Bad night?" Noah asked her quietly as he handed her a cup of coffee. Emily wrapped her hands around the mug, seeking its warmth. "Just dreams," she murmured. "Weird dreams." "About?" Noah prompted gently. She hesitated, her eyes briefly flicking to the surrounding trees. "I dreamt something was watching me through the tent walls, standing just outside, looking in." Small shiver ran through her. "But it didn't have eyes, just dark spaces where eyes should be." "It was probably just that journal getting into your head," Noah reassured her, though his mind flashed to the footprint he'd found and erased. As they ate breakfast, Noah outlined the day's plan. A hike to the ridge overlooking the valley, lunch with a view, then back to camp by mid-afternoon. The normality of planning seemed to ease the tension, and by the time they were packing their day packs, the night's unease had largely dissipated in the bright morning sun. "Everyone bring plenty of water," Noah instructed. "It's going to be hot today." "Yes, Dad," Jake rolled his eyes, but he was grinning. As the others prepared, Marcus sidled up beside Noah. "Something strange happened last night," he said, his voice low. "I heard whispering outside our tent." Noah's stomach tightened. "What kind of whispering?" "I couldn't make out words exactly. It was like..." Marcus pushed his glasses up, searching for the right description. "Like someone talking just below the threshold of understanding. I got up to check." "You went outside?" Noah interrupted, alarmed. Marcus nodded. "Just for a minute. There was nothing there. No animals, no people. But the whispering stopped the moment I unzipped the tent." He frowned. "It's probably just the wind in the trees, or maybe some kind of auditory hallucination from altitude adjustment." "Probably," Noah agreed, not mentioning his own experience. The hike proved to be exactly what they needed. The exertion, fresh air, and spectacular mountain vistas worked like a cleansing ritual, washing away the lingering unease from the previous night. They reached the ridge by noon, as planned, and sat together enjoying the panoramic view as they ate their lunch. "This was worth every blister," Liv declared, her camera clicking rapidly as she captured the sweeping landscape. Even her usual skepticism had melted into genuine appreciation. Sophie sat slightly apart from the group, her legs crossed in a meditative pose as she gazed out over the valleys below. "The mountains remember," she said cryptically when Jake asked what she was doing. They lingered at the ridge longer than planned, reluctant to leave the open sky and unobstructed views. Something about the dense forest surrounding their campsite suddenly seemed less appealing in comparison. "We should head back," Noah finally announced, checking his watch. "We don't want to be hiking in the dark." The descent was quicker but required more concentration to navigate the rocky trail. Conversation dwindled as they focused on their footing. By the time they reached their campsite, the sun was already dipping toward the western peaks, casting long shadows through the trees. Noah noticed at first a subtle wrongness about their camp. Nothing was missing or damaged, but something had been there. The dirt around their tents showed numerous indentations, footprints like the one he'd seen the night before, circling each tent. "Guys," he called, his voice tight. "Look at this." The others gathered around, staring at the tracks pressed into the soil. "Those weren't here when we left," Jake stated, all pretense of nonchalance gone. Marcus knelt to examine one of the prints more closely. "These are unusual, not standard hiking boots. And look at the pattern. They only go toward the tents, never away." "Someone's messing with us," Liv declared, her journalist's mind immediately seeking a rational explanation. "There must be other hikers in the area who saw our camp while we were gone." "And decided to circle our tents without taking anything?" Noah questioned. "Why would anyone do that?" "To scare us," obviously, Liv retorted, but her voice lacked conviction. "Like that journal. Just someone's idea of a prank." Emily had gone very still, her eyes fixed on the footprints. "They're the same," she whispered. "The same as in my dream." Sophie moved to stand beside her, placing a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "You feel it too, don't you? The presence." "There is no presence," Liv snapped, her voice rising with an edge of panic. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. That stupid journal has everyone jumping at shadows." "Then explain the footprints, Liv," Jake challenged. "Explain how they only lead toward our tents and then just stop." "I don't have to explain it," Liv said defiantly. "There's obviously a logical explanation even if we can't see it right now." "We should leave," Emily said suddenly, her voice small but firm. "Pack up and hike out. Tonight." "It's already getting dark," Noah countered, though the idea held appeal. Hiking these trails at night would be dangerous. "More dangerous than staying here?" Emily asked, her eyes wide with genuine fear. Marcus had been silent, still examining the footprints with scientific detachment. "These impressions are fresh," he observed, "made within the last hour or two. If someone is out there, they can't have gone far." Noah made a decision. We're not hiking out in the dark. That's asking for a real accident. We'll stay alert, take watches in pairs tonight, and decide what to do in the morning. His voice took on the decisive tone that had always made him the natural leader of their group. Jake and I will check the perimeter. Marcus, get the fire going. A big one. Liv, Emily, Sophie, stay together and set up for dinner. The assignments gave everyone purpose, pushing aside fear in favor of action. By the time Jake and Noah returned from their circuit of the area surrounding the camp, finding nothing unusual beyond a continued unnerving silence in the forest, the fire was blazing and the smell of cooking food filled the clearing. Dinner was a subdued affair, with conversation repeatedly circling back to the footprints despite attempts to discuss other topics. As darkness fully enveloped the forest, they huddled closer to the fire, its light creating a fragile boundary between their camp and the impenetrable darkness beyond. "We should take another look at the journal," Sophie suggested suddenly. "There might be more information, something that could help us understand what's happening." "Or we could just ignore it and not feed into the hysteria," Liv countered. Noah hesitated, then reached for his backpack. "Maybe Sophie's right. If there's something out there, I want to know what we're dealing with." He extracted the journal and placed it on his lap, not immediately opening it. "I still think it's someone messing with us," Liv insisted, but her voice wavered slightly. Noah opened the journal, turning past the entries they'd already read. The next page was blank, as were the ones that followed. "Nothing," he said, flipping through empty page after empty page. "Wait," Sophie said, leaning closer. "Go back to the last entry." Noah turned back to the final written page, where the frantic warning ended in a trailing scrawl. There was something different. A small mark at the very bottom of the page that hadn't been there before. A single dot of ink, as if the pen had been pressed to the paper for just a moment. "That's it?" Jake sounded disappointed. "A dot? Turn the page," Sophie urged. Noah did, expecting another blank page. Instead, there was fresh writing, the same spidery script as before, but darker, more deliberate. "That wasn't there yesterday," Marcus said, his scientific certainty shaken. "I looked through the entire journal. Those pages were empty." Noah began to read aloud. "They found my journal. 6 of them, young, oblivious to what surrounds them. The tall one, their leader, senses something isn't right. The quiet girl with gentle hands feels it most strongly. The skeptic will be the hardest to convince, but she'll see eventually. They all do." A cold silence fell over the group. The entry described them perfectly. "This is impossible," Liv whispered, her skepticism finally cracking. That can't be real." "Keep reading," Jake urged, his voice tight with a combination of fear and excitement. Noah continued. "It's watching them now, as it watched me, drawing closer with each passing hour. The footprints have started. Soon will come the whispers, then the dreams. It feeds on their awareness, their fear. Reading these words strengthens it." "Stop," Emily interrupted, her face pale. "Please stop reading it." Noah closed the journal. "This doesn't make sense. These pages were blank yesterday." "Unless someone wrote in it last night," Liv suggested, grasping for rationality. "One of us could have—" "To what end, Liv?" Marcus asked. "To scare ourselves?" "Then someone else is out there," she insisted. "Someone who's been watching us." "The writing is identical to the earlier entries," Sophie pointed out. "Same handwriting, same ink aging. That would be impossible to fake overnight." Jake suddenly stood, reaching for the journal. "Give it to me." "What are you going to do?" Noah asked, not releasing his grip on the book. "I'm going to see if there's more," Jake replied, a reckless glint in his eye. "If reading it strengthens whatever this is, let's put it to the test." "That's a terrible idea," Emily protested. "Jake, don't," Sophie warned, but Jake had already pulled the journal from Noah's grasp. "What are you also afraid of? If this is a hoax, nothing will happen. If it's not—" He let the implication hang in the air. "Jake, seriously, don't—" Noah began. Jake flipped open the journal again, turning to the most recently written page. In a clear, defiant voice, he began to read, "It's watching them now, as it watched me," drawing closer with each passing hour. He continued reading the entry they'd just seen, his voice growing more confident with each word, as if challenging whatever force might be listening. When he reached the end, he turned the page. His expression changed instantly, the blood draining from his face. "What?" Marcus demanded. "What does it say?" Jake's voice shook as he read the new entry. "The reckless one reads these words aloud, on their second night. He sits by the fire in a red jacket surrounded by his frightened friends. He does not believe, not truly, but he will. The tall one found my footprint last night but hid it from the others. The quiet one dreams of its face. The logical one heard its whispers. They sit beneath the ancient pines beside the stream that curves eastward, in the clearing that was my final camp, where I last wrote before it took me." Jake looked up, his face ashen. "It describes exactly where we are, what we're doing right this minute." "I never told anyone about the footprint," Noah said quietly, "or about hearing the pages turn. And I didn't tell anyone except Noah about my dream," Emily added, her voice barely audible. "Or the whispering," Marcus confirmed. Liv stood abruptly. "This isn't funny anymore. Which one of you is doing this? Is this why you organized this trip, Noah? To play some elaborate prank? You think I'd joke about something connected to these mountains?" Noah replied sharply. "After what happened to my dad?" The mention of his father's disappearance silenced Liv's accusations. They all knew how deeply that wound ran. "Then what's happening?" she asked, her voice smaller now. "Because this can't be real." "I think," Sophie said slowly, "that when Jake found the journal, he didn't just discover it, he released something that's been waiting." A twig snapped loudly in the darkness beyond their fire, causing all 6 friends to jump. The flames seemed to dim momentarily, as if a cold breath had passed over them. "It's just an animal," Liv said weakly. "No," Emily whispered, her eyes wide as she stared into the darkness. "It's not." Noah stood up, flashlight in hand. "Stay by the fire, all of you." "You're not going out there alone," Marcus said, rising to stand beside him. Before Noah could respond, a low sound drifted through the trees. Not quite a whisper, not quite a sigh, but something in between. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Emily pressed her hands to her ears. "It's saying something." "I don't hear words," Jake said, though he too was staring into the darkness. "Listen," Emily insisted. "It knows our names." As if in confirmation, the sound came again, slightly louder. A sibilant whisper that seemed to form around the syllables of Emily's name, stretching them into something barely recognizable but unmistakable. The fire flickered wildly, then stabilized, casting long, dancing shadows across their horrified faces. "We're leaving at first light," Noah declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Pack only what you need, we're hiking out." No one disagreed. "We'll take watches in pairs," he continued. "Marcus and I will take first shift, Jake and Emily second, Liv and Sophie third. No one goes anywhere alone, not even to the edge of it. Camp to pee, clear?" Nods all around. The earlier division between skeptics and believers had evaporated in the face of what they'd just experienced. As the others retreated to their tents, Noah and Marcus positioned themselves on opposite sides of the fire, facing outward toward the darkness. The journal sat between them, closed and ominous. "Whatever's happening," Marcus said quietly, "it shouldn't be possible. The writing appearing like that, it defies rational explanation." "My dad used to say these mountains had secrets," Noah replied, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Places where the normal rules don't apply." "You think that's what happened to him?" Marcus asked carefully. "Something like this?" Noah had asked himself that question thousands of times over the years. "I don't know, but I'm starting to think it might be possible." The hours of their watch passed in tense silence. Occasionally, they would hear that same whispering sound, never close enough to make out words, but always present, circling their camp like an invisible predator. When it was time to wake Jake and Emily for the second watch, Noah found Jake already awake, sitting up in his sleeping bag. "Couldn't sleep," Jake admitted, his usual cockiness subdued. "Keep thinking about that new entry, how it appeared after I read aloud." "Just stay alert," Noah advised as he and Marcus prepared to turn in. "Wake us if anything happens. Anything at all." Inside their tent, Noah lay awake, listening to the night sounds or lack thereof. Beside him, Marcus's breathing eventually deepened into sleep, but Noah remained vigilant, his mind racing. He was on the edge of finally drifting off when he heard Emily scream. Noah burst from the tent, Marcus right behind him. Emily was standing by the fire, her face contorted in terror, pointing toward the trees. Jake stood beside her, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness where she indicated. "What happened?" Noah demanded. "It was there," Emily gasped, standing just at the edge of the light, watching us. "I didn't see anything," Jake admitted, "but she screamed, and when I looked up, there was something. A shadow, maybe. It moved when I pointed the light at it." Liv and Sophie emerged from their tent, confusion and fear evident on their faces. "What's going on?" Liv asked. "Emily saw something in the trees," Noah explained. "Not something," Emily corrected, her voice shaking. "Someone, the person from the journal, but wrong, like they'd been changed." "Changed how?" Sophie asked gently. Emily shook her head, unable or unwilling to elaborate. No one slept for the remainder of the night. They sat together around the fire, keeping it blazing bright, jumping at every sound from the forest around them. The whispering continued, sometimes fading completely, sometimes growing close enough that they would spin around, expecting to find someone standing right behind them. As the first pale light of dawn appeared in the east, Noah felt his muscles finally begin to relax. They had made it through the night. In the light of day, they would pack up and hike out of these woods, leaving the journal and whatever had been unleashed behind them. "Start packing," he instructed. "The sooner we're out of here, the better." As the others began breaking down the camp, Jake approached Noah, the journal in his hands. "What should we do with this?" he asked. "Leave it? Burn it?" Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Let me see it," Noah said, taking the book from Jake's hands. He opened it, curious if the night had brought any new entries. The page that had been written on the previous night was now blank. Confused, Noah flipped through the journal, finding only empty pages until, near the end, he discovered fresh writing. "Guys," he called, his voice tight. "You need to see this." The group gathered around as Noah held up the journal. There, in that same spidery handwriting, was a new entry. They plan to leave today, to escape what they've awakened. They believe the light will keep them safe, that distance will save them. They are wrong. It is already too late. The Tall One knows this, deep down. His father learned this truth as well in his final moments. Noah's hands trembled as he read the words about his father. Jake, in a sudden surge of anger and defiance, grabbed the journal from Noah's hands. "This ends now," he declared. He flipped to the next page and in a loud, clear voice began to read, "They plan to leave today." "Jake, don't," Sophie cried, but it was too late. As Jake read the entry aloud, his voice faltering near the end, the group watched in horror as new words began to appear on the next page, the ink bleeding onto the paper as if an invisible hand were writing in real time. The reckless one reads these words on the morning of their third day, standing in the precise spot where I last stood. They have not yet realized that they are not the hunters of this mystery, but the hunted. They have not yet understood that, by finding my journal, by reading these words, they have already invited it into their circle. Look around you. Count your friends. Are you certain all are as they were yesterday? Jake dropped the journal as if it had burned him. Instinctively, All 6 friends looked at each other, suddenly questioning, suddenly suspicious. "What does it mean?" Emily whispered. "It's trying to turn us against each other," Noah said firmly. "Don't let it." But the seed of doubt had been planted. As they continued packing in tense silence, each found themselves watching the others, looking for signs of… what? They didn't know, but the journal's warning echoed in their minds. "Are you certain all are as they were yesterday?" The journal lay on the ground where Jake had dropped it, seemingly innocent in the morning light. No one made a move to pick it up. "We need to leave, now." Leave's voice had lost all its journalistic detachment, replaced by raw fear. "Forget the tents, forget the gear. Just grab what we need and go." Noah nodded, his leadership instincts kicking in despite his own mounting dread. "Food, water, first aid, that's it. We can be back at the trailhead by sunset if we push." They moved with desperate efficiency, stuffing essentials into day packs. No one spoke about the journal's latest message, but it hung in the air between them, turning each glance into a question. "Are you still you?" "What about that?" Marcus finally asked, pointing to the journal still lying in the dirt. "Leave it," Emily said quickly. "We can't," Sophie countered. "Whatever's happening, that journal is the key. If we leave it here, someone else might find it. So what do you suggest?" Liv asked sharply. "We carry the cursed book with us?" "I'll take it," Noah decided, picking it up carefully and securing it in his pack. "Let's move." Within 20 minutes, they were hiking back along the trail that had brought them in. The morning was bright and clear, the forest alive with birdsong and dappled sunlight, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of the night before. With each step away from their campsite, their spirits lifted slightly. Perhaps whatever presence had been stalking them was tied to that specific location. Noah led the way, setting a brisk pace with Marcus close behind. Liv and Sophie walked, together in the middle, while Emily and Jake brought up the rear. They had been hiking for nearly an hour when Noah realized the trail didn't look familiar. "This can't be right," he muttered, stopping so abruptly that Marcus nearly collided with him. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked. Noah gestured at their surroundings. "We should have reached the switchbacks by now, but this doesn't look like the trail we came in on." The others caught up, concern etched on their faces. "Did we take a wrong turn?" Jake asked. "There weren't any junctions," Noah replied, unfolding his map. "We've been following the main trail the whole time." Marcus pulled out his GPS device, frowning at the screen. "That's odd. It's not picking up a signal." "Let me see," Liv said, taking the device. She tapped the screen several times. "Dead. Could be the batteries." "I changed them yesterday," Marcus said. Sophie had wandered a few paces ahead, studying the path. "The trail seems to curve back around," she called. "I think we're going in circles." A heavy silence fell over the group as the implication sank in. "That's impossible," Noah insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "I know these mountains. I know this trail." "Apparently not," Liv said bitterly. Noah checked his compass, which spun uselessly, unable to find north. He tucked it away without comment, not wanting to add to the growing panic. "Let's keep going," he decided. "Stay together, watch for landmarks. Maybe we just got turned around somehow." They continued for another hour, moving steadily downhill, which should have been taking them toward the trailhead. Instead, the forest grew denser, the trees older and more gnarled, untouched by the forestry management that was common near the more accessible areas. "I don't recognize any of this," Jake admitted finally. "We're not on the same trail." "That's not possible," Noah repeated, but his words sounded hollow even to himself. "We haven't left the main path." "And yet," Liv gestured around them, "here we are." Emily had been quiet throughout the hike, but now she stopped, her face pale. "We're being led somewhere," she said softly. "It doesn't want us to leave." "It?" Liv challenged, though her skepticism was clearly faltering. "Whatever's been watching us," Emily replied. "Whatever wrote in that journal." "We should check the journal," Sophie suggested. "See if there's anything new." Noah hesitated, then slipped off his backpack and removed the leather-bound book. With reluctance, he opened it, flipping through the pages until he found fresh writing. They think they can escape so easily, walking in circles while believing they move forward. The forest shifts around them, leading them deeper rather than towards safety. The quiet one begins to understand. Soon she will hear its call, as I did in my final days. Christ, Jake muttered. It's like it's right here with us, watching everything we do. It is, Emily whispered, her eyes darting to the shadows between the trees. Noah closed the journal with a snap. We're not giving up. There has to be a way out. And what if there isn't? Liv demanded, fear sharpening her voice. What if we're trapped here with whatever took the person who wrote that journal? Then we figure out what it wants, Noah replied firmly. It wants us, Sophie said simply. Our fear, our awareness. That's how it feeds. That's not helpful. Sophie, Liv snapped. I'm just telling you what I feel, Sophie responded calmly. The journal is a lure, a trap. It draws people in, making them aware of the presence, which gives it strength. The more we focus on it, the stronger it becomes. So what do? Marcus asked. Pretend it doesn't exist? I don't know if that would work now, Sophie admitted. It's already aware of us, and we of it. The connection is established. Noah made a decision. We'll set up camp here. It's already afternoon, and I don't want us stumbling around an unfamiliar forest in the dark. We'll rest, regroup, and figure this out. No one argued, exhaustion and fear having taken their toll. They found a small clearing and mechanically went through the motions of setting up their tents with the gear they'd brought. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows through the trees, they gathered around a freshly built fire. The flames provided light and warmth, but also created a boundary, a fragile circle of safety against the encroaching darkness. We should take inventory of our supplies, Noah suggested, trying to maintain some normalcy. See how long we can last out here if needed. If needed? Liv echoed incredulously. We need to get out of here, Noah, not calculate how long we can stay. I'm just being practical, he defended. If we can't find the trail tomorrow, we're dead, Liv cut in. You read what happened to the person who wrote that journal. We don't know what happened to them, Marcus pointed out. They disappeared, Noah said quietly. Like my father. A heavy silence followed his words. You think the same thing that took the journal's writer took your dad? Jake asked carefully. Noah stared into the fire. I don't know, but my dad knew these mountains better than anyone. He wouldn't just get lost. He wouldn't just disappear without a trace unless... He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Emily, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly tilted her head as if listening. Do you hear that? She asked. The others fell silent, straining to hear. I don't hear anything, Marcus said after a moment. There, Emily insisted. Like someone calling, far away. They listened again. This time Jake shook his head. Nothing. Emily stood, taking a step toward the darkness beyond their fire. It's calling my name, she whispered, just at the edge of hearing. Noah moved quickly to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. Emily, there's nothing there. She looked at him with unfocused eyes. You can't hear it? It sounds like the person from the journal. They're trying to warn us. Sophie approached, her expression concerned. What are they saying, Emily? I can't quite make it out, Emily replied, still staring into the darkness. Something about not being alone, that we were brought here for a reason. Sit down, Emily, Liv urged, her voice gentler than before. You're scaring us. Slowly, Emily allowed herself to be led back to the fire, but her eyes remained fixed on the forest beyond their circle of light. I think she's hallucinating from stress, Marcus suggested quietly to Noah. We all are to some degree. Fear and sleep deprivation can cause all sorts of perceptual distortions. Maybe, Noah agreed, wanting to believe it was that simple. Let's try to get some rest. We'll take turns keeping watch. As darkness fully enveloped the forest, they huddled closer to the fire. The warmth and light provided some comfort, but also made the surrounding darkness seem even more impenetrable. Shadows shifted at the periphery of their vision, formless, fleeting movements that vanished when looked at directly. "The shadows are moving," Jake observed, his voice tight. "It's just the firelight," Liv said, though she didn't sound convinced. "No," Jake insisted. "They're moving against the light. Watch." They all stared into the darkness beyond their camp. The shadows did seem to move independently of the flickering fire, sliding between trees, drawing closer then retreating, like curious predators testing their prey's awareness. "I think we should check the journal again," Sophie suggested. Noah hesitated, then retrieved it from his pack. The pages seemed to fall open naturally to a new entry. They sit around their fire, believing the light protects them. They watch the darkness, finally seeing the shapes that have been there all along. The shadows draw closer, curious about these new visitors. The quiet one hears my voice now but cannot understand my warnings. The reckless one will be first to venture beyond the light. "This is insane," Liv whispered, her skepticism finally shattered. "How can it know what we're doing, what we're saying?" "Because it's here with us," Sophie replied simply, "all around us." "I say we burn the journal," Jake suggested suddenly. "If that's what's connecting this thing to us, let's destroy it." "And if that makes it angry?" Marcus countered. "If this entity is real, we don't know what destroying its journal might do." "I'm with Jake," Liv said. "Burn it. What's the worst that could happen? We'd lose the only clue we have about what's happening to us," Noah pointed out. "It's not a clue, Noah," Liv argued. "It's the problem. It's how this thing is tracking us, manipulating us." "I don't think destroying it will help," Sophie interjected calmly. "The journal isn't the entity itself, it's just a tool, a conduit. The presence was here before we found the journal. It would remain after." Emily had been silent, still staring into the darkness. "It's getting closer," she murmured. They all turned to look where she was staring. At first, there was nothing but the night-shrouded forest. Then, gradually, they became aware of a deeper darkness moving between the trees, a shadow more solid than the rest, weaving slowly toward their camp. "Do you see that?" Jake's voice cracked slightly. "I see it," Noah confirmed, his mouth dry. The shape paused just beyond the reach of their firelight, an absence of form rather than a defined figure. It seemed to watch them, patient and curious. Emily stood again, taking a step toward the darkness. "Emily, no!" Noah caught her arm, pulling her back. The motion seemed to trigger something. The shadow retreated rapidly, dissolving into the night. Emily blinked as if coming out of a trance. "It was calling me," she said, confusion evident in her voice. "It wanted to show me something." "Whatever it wants to show you, trust me." "You don't want to see it," Jake said. "I'll take first watch," Noah decided. "The rest of you try to get some sleep." "In pairs," Marcus suggested. "No one should be alone, even in the tents." They agreed, arranging themselves so that 2 people were in each tent while one kept watch. Liv reluctantly paired with Emily, while Marcus stayed near the fire with Noah. Jake and Sophie took the 3rd tent, with Jake scheduled for the next watch. The night deepened around them. Noah kept the fire burning brightly, feeding it regularly, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness for movement. Beside him, Marcus dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every unusual sound. "This doesn't make any sense," Marcus muttered during one such awakening. "Forests can't rearrange themselves. Journals can't write themselves. It defies every natural law." "Maybe there are things beyond natural law," Noah suggested quietly. Marcus frowned. "You sound like Sophie." "I'm just saying, what if there are forces out there we don't understand? Things science hasn't explained yet." "Like what took your father?" Marcus asked gently. Noah nodded, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames. "I never believed his stories about these mountains, about places where reality bent, where things watched from just beyond normal perception. I thought they were just campfire tales meant to keep me alert in the wilderness." He paused. "Now, I wonder if he was trying to warn me." Their conversation was interrupted by a strange sound, a distant, hollow knocking like wood striking wood. It echoed through the forest, unnatural and deliberate. "What is that?" Marcus whispered. "I don't know," Noah replied, gripping his flashlight tighter. The knocking continued, rhythmic and persistent, seeming to circle their camp. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. "I'm going to check on the others," Noah said, rising to his feet. He approached the tent where Liv and Emily were sleeping, calling softly before unzipping the entrance. Inside, Liv was awake, sitting up in her sleeping bag. "Did you hear that?" she asked. "The knocking?" "Yeah." "What was it?" "No idea." "Where's Emily?" Liv looked confused. "She's right." She turned to where Emily's sleeping bag lay empty. "She was just here, I swear she was right beside me." Alarm shot through Noah. "When did you last see her?" "When we went to sleep, maybe an hour ago. I must have dozed off." Noah backed out of the tent. "Marcus, Emily's gone." A quick check of Jake and Sophie's tent revealed only Sophie, also asleep. "Jake's missing too," Noah reported, his heart pounding. "They must have wandered off." "Or been taken," Liv suggested, her voice tight with fear. Noah refused to consider that possibility. "Jake was supposed to relieve me for watch. Maybe he went looking for Emily when he saw she was gone, without telling anyone?" Marcus questioned. They woke Sophie, who appeared disoriented. "Jake said he was going to take his watch," she murmured. "I fell asleep after that." Noah grabbed a second flashlight from his pack. "We need to find them. Now." "We can't go out there," Liv protested. "Not in the dark, not with those things moving around." "We can't just leave them out there either," Noah countered. "I'll come with you," Marcus volunteered. "No," Noah decided. "Stay here with Liv and Sophie, keep the fire going. If Jake and Emily come back, make sure they stay put." Before anyone could argue further, Noah stepped beyond the firelight. Flashlight. Beam cutting through the darkness. He moved cautiously, calling Jake and Emily's names in a harsh whisper. The forest was eerily silent, his light creating strange, shifting patterns as it bounced off trees and underbrush. Noah tried to maintain his sense of direction, making sure he could always see the glow of their campfire behind him. He had ventured about 50 yards from camp when he heard movement ahead. Freezing in place, he directed his light toward the sound. "Jake, Emily?" No response, but the rustling continued, moving away from him. Noah followed, pushing through dense underbrush, his light bobbing with each step. The sounds led him deeper into the forest, until suddenly he realized he could no longer see the campfire behind him. Panic rose in his throat. He turned in a full circle, trying to get his bearings, but the forest looked the same in every direction. Dark, dense, unfamiliar. "Jake!" he called, louder now. "Emily!" A branch snapped nearby, and Noah spun toward the sound, his light illuminating a figure, standing motionless between the trees. "Jake?" The figure didn't respond or move. It just stood there, slightly hunched, facing away from Noah. "Jake, is that you?" Slowly, Noah approached, his heart hammering in his chest. As he drew closer, he could make out Jake's red jacket, the back of his head. "Jake, what are you doing out here? Where's Emily?" Still no response. Noah reached out hesitantly, touching Jake's shoulder. Jake turned, and Noah barely suppressed a scream. Jake's face was blank, his eyes unfocused, staring through Noah rather than at him. His expression was unnaturally still, like a photograph. "Jake, can you hear me?" Jake blinked slowly, then seemed to come back to himself. He stumbled slightly, looking around in confusion. "Noah, where are we?" "You tell me," Noah replied, his voice unsteady. "You disappeared from camp. So did Emily. Have you seen her?" Jake shook his head, disoriented. "I don't remember leaving camp. I was going to take my watch and then..." He trailed off, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I don't know." It's like I just woke up here. We need to find Emily and get back to camp, Noah said, trying to keep his voice calm despite his rising fear. Do you remember seeing anything? Hearing anything? Jake pressed his palms against his temples. There was whispering, someone calling. I thought it was Emily at first, but he looked up suddenly, his eyes wide. The voice. It knew things, Noah. Things about me. About all of us. It said it's been waiting for us. Let's find Emily, Noah insisted, pushing aside the chill that ran down his spine at Jake's words. I think I remember. Jake turned, pointing deeper into the forest. This way. I think I was following something. Or someone. They moved carefully through the trees, calling Emily's name softly. The forest seemed to press in around them, the darkness almost tangible between the skeletal branches of the ancient pines. There, Jake suddenly whispered, pointing. Noah's flashlight beam found Emily standing motionless in a small clearing ahead, her back to them, head tilted as if listening. Emily, Noah called gently, approaching slowly. Emily, it's Noah and Jake. She didn't respond or turn. Noah moved carefully around to face her, his light illuminating her features. Her eyes were open but unseeing, fixed on some distant point beyond the trees. Her lips moved slightly, as if she were holding a conversation, but no sound emerged. Emily, Noah tried again, touching her arm gently. She blinked, her eyes focusing slowly on his face. Noah? Her voice was distant, confused. Where am I? In the forest, he explained. You wandered away from camp. Do you remember anything? The voice, she murmured. It was so clear this time. It said we were brought here for a purpose that we need to understand before it's too late. Understand what? Jake asked. Emily shook her head. I don't know. It's like fragments of thought, images, feelings, nothing clear. She shivered suddenly. But it's afraid. Whatever's out there, it's afraid of something worse. Let's get back to camp, Noah urged, taking her arm gently. The others are worried. Navigating back proved surprisingly easy, as if the forest that had conspired to lead them astray now opened a clear path. Within minutes they could see the glow of their campfire ahead. Liv, Marcus, and Sophie rushed forward as they emerged from the trees. What happened? Liv demanded. Where did you go? I don't know, Emily admitted. I remember falling asleep and then I was just out there in the forest. Same here, Jake added, like sleepwalking or something. Or something was luring you out, Sophie suggested quietly. They gathered once more around the fire, its warmth a desperate comfort against the chill realization of their situation. No one suggested returning to the tents. Instead, they huddled together, waiting for dawn, jumping at every sound from the surrounding forest. I don't understand what it wants from us, Liv said after a long silence. Why not just take us if that's what it's after? Why all this psychological torture? Maybe it can't just take us, Marcus theorized. Maybe it needs us to go willingly, or to be in a certain state of mind. Or maybe it's playing with its food, Jake muttered darkly. No, Emily shook her head. It's trying to communicate, to warn us. Warn us about what? Noah asked. I don't know, she admitted. But it's desperate, afraid. The journal writer, Sophie suggested. Maybe their consciousness is still here somehow, trying to help us avoid their fate. Or maybe it's the entity itself manipulating Emily, Liv countered, making her think it's friendly, so she'll go to it willingly. I know what I felt, Emily insisted. There's more happening here than we understand. Noah was about to respond when Sophie suddenly stood up, her attention caught by something on the ground near the edge of their clearing. She walked toward it, bending to pick up what looked like a piece of paper. What is it? Noah called. Sophie returned to the fire, her expression troubled. In her hands was a torn page, yellowed and weathered like the pages of the journal, but separate from it. It wasn't there before, she said. I'm certain. What does it say? Marcus asked. Sophie held it close to the firelight and began to read. By the time you find this page, it will be too late for some of you. The division has already begun. The reckless one has been marked, his mind touched by what lurks beyond the trees. The quiet one hears my warnings but cannot understand them fully. When morning comes, you will attempt to leave this place again. You will fail. The forest will lead you back to where it all began, to the place where I made my final stand. There, beneath the ancient pine split by lightning, you will find what remains of me, and you will understand the true nature of what hunts in these mountains. A horrified silence followed Sophie's reading. Marked? Jake repeated, his voice cracking. What does that mean, marked? All eyes turned to him, remembering how they had found him in the forest, blank-faced, unresponsive, as if something else had been looking out through his eyes. It's trying to turn us against each other, Noah said firmly. We can't let that happen. But what if it's true? Liv asked, her voice barely audible. What if whatever's out there has already gotten to Jake somehow? I'm fine, Jake insisted, though his hands trembled slightly. I don't remember what happened out there, but I'm still me. The lightning-struck pine, Marcus said, changing the subject deliberately. That was mentioned in the first journal entry. I've set up camp near the old lightning-struck pine. So we're being led back to where the journal writer disappeared, Noah concluded. Why? Liv demanded. So the same thing can happen to us? Or so we can understand what we're facing, Sophie suggested. Knowledge is power. If we know what it is, maybe we can fight it. Or avoid its fate, Emily added softly. Dawn's coming soon, Noah observed, noting the faint lightening of the sky visible through the trees. We should try to find this lightning-struck pine. It's our only lead. Are you insane? Liv exclaimed. You want us to go exactly where this thing wants us to go? We're already where it wants us, Noah pointed out. The whole forest is its domain. At least this way, we're choosing to face it on our terms. Jake nodded, a hint of his old recklessness returning. I'm with Noah. I'd rather confront this thing than keep running in circles. One by one, they reluctantly agreed. As the first pale light of dawn filtered through the trees, they packed up their minimal camp and prepared to move out. How do we find this tree? Marcus asked. I think... Emily hesitated. I think I know where it is. In my visions, or whatever they were, I saw a massive pine, split down the middle by lightning but still alive. It's not far from here. You're sure? Noah asked. Emily nodded. As sure as I can be about any of this. With Emily leading the way, they set off through the forest. The morning light did little to dispel the oppressive atmosphere that hung over them. The birds were silent, the air still. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, watching their progress. They had been walking for about an hour when Emily stopped abruptly. There, she whispered, pointing ahead. In a small clearing stood an enormous pine tree, ancient and gnarled. A jagged black scar ran down its entire length, splitting the trunk nearly in two. Yet somehow the tree still lived, its branches heavy with green needles. The lightning-struck pine, Noah confirmed. They approached cautiously, forming a loose semicircle around the massive tree. Its presence was commanding, almost sentient, as if it had been waiting for them. Now what? Jake asked, his voice hushed. The page said we'd find what remains of the journal writer, Marcus recalled. Maybe near the base of the tree? They began to search the area, examining the ground around the split trunk. It was Sophie who found it, a small depression at the base of the tree, partially covered by exposed roots and years of fallen pine needles. Here, she called, kneeling beside the spot. The ground's been disturbed. Noah joined her, helping to clear away the debris. As they dug deeper, their fingers hit something solid. Together they unearthed a small metal box, rusted but intact, its lock long since corroded away. With trembling hands, Noah lifted the lid. Inside lay a collection of personal items, a weathered wallet, a set of keys, a tarnished compass, and beneath them, another journal, newer than the one they had found, its pages untouched by time. "Another journal?" Liv asked, peering over Noah's shoulder. Noah lifted it carefully, opening to the first page. His heart stopped as he saw the name written there in neat, familiar handwriting. "James Carter," he read aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "Carter?" Jake repeated. "Like my father," Noah confirmed, staring at the journal in disbelief. This was my father's. As the others gathered closer, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, causing the split pine to creak ominously above them. Pages of his father's journal fluttered open, settling on an entry dated just days before his disappearance. And as Noah began to read his father's words, a chill spread through him that had nothing to do with the morning air. "I've found it at last. The place where Richard Hale vanished in '78. The journal he left behind has led me here to the lightning-struck pine. I understand now what he was trying to warn about. The entity that stalks these mountains isn't a ghost or spirit as local legends claim. It's something older, something that exists in the gaps between realities. The native people knew not to venture here. They called it the thinning place, where the boundary between worlds wears thin. I'm close to understanding how to seal it, but I need more time. If I don't succeed, I've arranged a failsafe. The journals will find their way to those who can finish what I started. I just pray that Noah never becomes involved. These mountains have already taken too much from our family." Noah looked up from the journal, meeting the frightened eyes of his friends. "My father knew," he whispered. "He knew about this place, about what's happening to us." "Noah," Sophie said gently, pointing to the journal. "Look." Fresh words were appearing on the next page, the ink bleeding through as if written by an invisible hand. "The circle closes. The son returns to the father's last stand, but he brings others with him, unknowing sacrifices, to what hunts beyond the veil. One has already been claimed. The rest will follow one by one, unless they find the strength to do what I could not. The boundary must be sealed, or none will leave these mountains alive." As they stared in horror at the freshly written warning, the forest around them fell into an unnatural silence. The wind died. The scattered morning light dimmed, as if clouds had suddenly covered the sun. And from the darkness between the trees, something moved toward them. A shadow more substantial than the rest, advancing, with deliberate, unhurried steps. "Get back!" Noah shouted, instinctively positioning himself between his friends and the approaching shadow. "Everyone behind me!" They scrambled to comply, forming a tight cluster at the base of the lightning-struck pine. The shadow paused at the edge of the clearing, hovering like a smudge of deeper darkness against the trees. It seemed to consider them, an intelligence evident in its stillness. "What is that thing?" Liv's voice trembled. "Something from beyond the veil," Sophie whispered, echoing the journal's words. "Something that exists in the gaps between realities." The shadow shifted, not quite advancing but spreading outward, elongating around the perimeter of the clearing. It was as if it were testing the boundaries, looking for weaknesses. "It can't come into the clearing," Emily observed suddenly. "Look, it's staying at the tree line." Noah glanced down at his father's journal, still open in his hands. "The lightning-struck pine," he murmured. "It must be significant somehow. My father wrote that he was close to understanding how to seal something." "Seal what?" Marcus asked. "The boundary," Sophie replied, "between our world and whatever that is." The shadow continued its slow circuit of the clearing, never entering but never retreating. Occasionally it would pause, seeming to focus its attention more intently on them, particularly on Jake, whose face had gone pale with recognition. "I've seen it before," he said hoarsely. "Last night in the forest. It was, inside my head." "One of you has already been marked," Marcus quoted from the torn page they'd found. "Jake, what did it do to you out there?" Jake shook his head, his usual confidence shattered. I don't know, I can't remember, but I can feel it now like an echo in my mind. It's hungry. Liv edged away from him slightly, fear evident in her eyes. What does that mean? Is he dangerous to us now? I'm still me, Jake insisted, though doubt clouded his features. I think. Noah turned his attention back to his father's journal, flipping through the pages with increasing urgency. There has to be something here. Some clue about what my father discovered, how he planned to seal the boundary. We should get back to our camp, Marcus suggested. Gather our supplies. If we're going to figure this out, we need food, water, shelter. And leave this clearing? Liv looked skeptically at the shadow still circling them. That thing is waiting for exactly that. We can't stay here indefinitely, Marcus pointed out. We have limited supplies with us. Noah weighed their options, his leadership instincts battling with the overwhelming fear inspired by the shadow entity. Marcus is right, we need our gear. He tucked his father's journal securely into his pack alongside the original one. This clearing seems to offer some protection. We'll come back here, make camp under the pine. How do we get past that? Emily asked, nodding toward the shadow. We go together, Noah decided. Stay close, move fast. Don't look at it, don't acknowledge it. Are you serious? Liv asked incredulously. Sophie said it feeds on our awareness, Noah explained. So we deny it that. We ignore it. That's your plan? Liv's voice rose. Just pretend the monster isn't there? Do you have a better idea? Noah challenged. She didn't. Stay together, Noah instructed. No matter what happens, don't separate. They moved as a tight group, Noah leading, Marcus bringing up the rear. As they approached the edge of the clearing where the shadow waited, it seemed to intensify, becoming more substantial. Don't look at it, Noah reminded them. Eyes forward. Keep moving. They stepped beyond the safety of the clearing, plunging into the forest. The shadow didn't move to intercept them directly, but the darkness between the trees deepened, making their path harder to discern. Noah kept his eyes fixed on landmarks ahead, refusing to acknowledge the shifting darkness in his peripheral vision. Behind him, he could hear the quick, shallow breathing of his friends. Jake's breath in particular seemed labored, as if he were fighting against some invisible resistance. Almost back to camp, Noah encouraged, recognizing the terrain. Just a little further. A strangled gasp from behind made him turn. Emily had stopped, her eyes wide, staring at something just beyond their group. Emily, don't, Noah began. It's right there, she whispered, pointing a trembling finger. Standing right there, watching us. Despite his own instructions, Noah looked. For a split second he saw it, not as a shapeless shadow this time, but as a figure, vaguely human, in outline but wrong somehow, as if assembled by something that had only a theoretical understanding of human anatomy. Its face was a blank void, darkness where features should be. Then, as if Noah's direct gaze had disrupted it, the figure dissolved back into formless shadow. Keep moving, he urged, pulling Emily forward. Don't look at it. They hurried on, the forest around them alive with movement now. Shadows darting. Between trees, flashes of deeper darkness at the edge of vision. Whispering sounds that might have been wind through pine needles or something else entirely. When they finally stumbled into their campsite, all 5 of them were breathing hard, not just from exertion but from suppressed panic. We need to grab our gear and get back to the lightning-struck pine, Noah instructed. Quick and efficient, just the essentials. They split up to gather their supplies, working with frantic energy. Noah was stuffing his sleeping bag into its compression sack when he heard Sophie cry out. He rushed to her side, finding her staring at the original journal, which lay open on the ground where it must have fallen from his pack. What is it? He asked. New writing, she said, pointing to the page. But different this time. The handwriting was indeed different. Not the spidery script of the original journal writer, but something cruder, more urgent. One of you is already marked. The reckless one carries it within. It will use him to reach the others. Trust no one who has been alone in the forest. They exchanged uneasy glances, eyes inevitably drawn to Jake, who stood several yards away, shoving items into his backpack. "We're not turning on each other," Noah declared firmly. "That's what it wants." "But what if it's true?" Liv whispered. "What if Jake really is compromised somehow?" "Then we help him fight it," Noah replied. "We stay together. We stay strong." They finished packing in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Noah could feel the group dynamics shifting, trust eroding in real time. Jake seemed to sense it too, keeping his distance, his movements becoming increasingly erratic and jerky, as if fighting some internal battle. "I'm ready," Marcus announced, hefting his pack. "Let's get back to the pine." They retraced their steps, moving quicker now that they had a destination. The forest around them seemed less threatening in the full light of day, but the shadows between the trees remained unnaturally deep, watching, waiting. The lightning-struck pine came into view, its massive split trunk standing sentinel over the small clearing. As they approached, Noah felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a lightening of the oppressive presence that had been dogging them. "It is safer here," Sophie confirmed, echoing his thoughts. "Can you feel it? The energy is different." They established camp beneath the ancient tree, laying out sleeping bags in a circle around a newly built fire pit. By unspoken agreement, they positioned Jake's sleeping bag slightly apart from the others, something he noticed with a hurt expression but didn't comment on. As the day progressed, Noah immersed himself in his father's journal, searching for answers. James Carter had been tracking the entity for months before his disappearance, following a trail of missing hikers dating back decades. His entries grew, increasingly frantic as he closed in on the lightning-struck pine. "Listen to this," Noah said as they gathered around for an early dinner. He read aloud from his father's journal. "The entity cannot fully manifest in our reality. It needs a conduit, a human consciousness to latch onto. That's why it uses the journal, to make its potential victims aware of its existence, to establish a connection. Once that connection is made, it can influence their thoughts, their perceptions. Eventually, if the connection is strong enough, it can use them to reach others." "That's why it marked Jake," Emily said softly. "As a conduit." Jake's head snapped up. "I'm not," he began, then stopped, uncertainty clouding his features. "I don't feel like myself," he admitted quietly. "There's something whispering at the back of my mind, all the time now." "What's it saying?" Sophie asked gently. Jake shook his head. "Not words exactly, more like urges, suggestions." He looked up, meeting Noah's gaze directly. "It wants me to lead you all away from this clearing, into the deeper forest." A heavy silence followed his confession. "But you're fighting it," Noah stated. Jake nodded, his jaw tight. "For now." "My father writes about a ritual," Noah continued, turning back to the journal. "Something the indigenous people used to strengthen the boundary when it grew thin. It involves the lightning-struck pine. Apparently, the lightning created a natural conduit between worlds, which is why the entity can reach through more easily here. But it's also why the boundary can be sealed from this specific location." "What kind of ritual?" Marcus asked, his scientific skepticism giving way to desperate hope. "It's not entirely clear," Noah admitted, scanning the pages. "Something about anchoring the boundary to our reality through human consciousness, the opposite of what the entity tries to do." "Human sacrifice?" Liv asked, her voice tight. "No." Noah shook his head. "Not sacrifice, more like a willing anchor. Someone who consciously chooses to reinforce the boundary with their mind, their awareness." "That sounds like sacrifice to me," Liv muttered. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across their camp. The fire Marcus had built blazed, brightly pushing back the encroaching darkness, but all of them felt the change that came with nightfall, a strengthening of the presence that lurked just beyond their clearing. "We should take watches again tonight," Noah suggested. "But in pairs this time. No one keeps watch alone." They agreed on the rotation. Noah and Marcus first, then Liv and Sophie, with Emily staying with Jake during both shifts, partly to support him, partly to watch him. "Try to get some sleep," Noah advised as darkness fell completely. "Tomorrow we'll figure out this ritual, find a way to seal the boundary." The others retreated to their sleeping bags, huddling close to the fire. Jake sat slightly apart, his face haggard in the flickering light, eyes constantly darting to the shadows at the edge of the clearing. "You think your father found a way to seal the boundary?" Marcus asked Noah quietly as they took the first watch. "I think he tried," Noah replied. "But something went wrong. He disappeared before he could complete it. And now it's our responsibility," Marcus concluded. Noah nodded grimly, staring into the darkness beyond their camp. "I brought us here. I need to get us out." The night deepened around them. Occasionally they would glimpse movement at the periphery of the firelight. Shadows, sliding between trees, watching, waiting. The whispering sounds returned, unintelligible but persistent, like dozens of voices just below the threshold of hearing. Noah checked on his sleeping friends periodically. Emily slept fitfully, her face contorted as if in the grip of disturbing dreams. Beside her, Jake lay rigid in his sleeping bag, eyes open, staring upward at the split trunk of the pine towering above them. "You should sleep," Noah told him softly. Jake shook his head slightly. "I'm afraid of what might happen if I do what I might do." Noah had no response to that. When it came time to wake Liv and Sophie for the second watch, Noah found himself reluctant to sleep. The forest had grown unnaturally still, the earlier whispering fallen silent. Even the fire seemed subdued, its flames burning steadily without the usual crackle and pop. "Something's changed," Sophie observed as she took her position for watch. "It's waiting." "For what?" Liv asked. "I don't know," Sophie admitted. "But the energy has shifted. It's focused now, gathering itself." Noah finally gave in to exhaustion, settling into his sleeping bag. Despite his anxiety, the emotional and physical toll of the past days soon pulled him under, into a deep, dreamless sleep. He was awakened by Emily's scream. Noah bolted upright, disoriented. The clearing was bathed. In the pale light of early dawn, the fire reduced to smoldering embers. Emily stood at the edge of their camp, pointing toward the trees with a trembling hand. "It was there," she gasped as Noah rushed to her side. "Right there, watching me." "What did you see?" he asked urgently. Emily's face was drained of color. "A man, but not a man, like a hollow version with nothing inside. No eyes, just darkness where they should be." She gripped Noah's arm. It looked like the man from the journal, the first one who disappeared here. "Richard Hale," Noah supplied, remembering the name from his father's journal. Emily nodded. "But wrong, twisted, like something wearing his appearance but not quite getting it right." The others had gathered around them now, staring anxiously into the forest where Emily had pointed. There was nothing visible in the early morning light, just trees and underbrush, peaceful and ordinary. "It vanished as soon as I saw it clearly," Emily continued. "But it was there, Noah, the closest it's come yet." "It's growing bolder," Sophie observed, "or stronger." They turned to look for Jake, finding him still in his sleeping bag, apparently asleep despite the commotion. Noah approached cautiously, reaching out to shake him awake. Jake's eyes snapped open immediately, but they were different somehow. Flatter, emptier. "Jake?" Noah said hesitantly. "You okay?" Jake blinked several times and the strange quality in his eyes receded. He sat up, looking confused. "What's happening? Why is everyone looking at me like that?" Emily saw something at the edge of the clearing, Noah explained, studying his friend carefully. "Did you hear anything, feel anything?" Jake rubbed his temples. "I was dreaming. Something about leading you all into the forest to a specific place." He looked up, his expression troubled. "It felt so real, like I knew exactly where to go." "Where?" Marcus asked. I don't know now, Jake admitted. The details are fading, but in the dream, I was so certain. Noah exchanged concerned glances with the others. Jake's description confirmed their fears. The entity was working through him, using his mind as a bridge. We need to complete the ritual, Noah decided, today, before the entity gets any stronger. He returned to his father's journal, poring over the final entries with renewed urgency. The others busied themselves with breakfast preparations, though no one had much appetite. The atmosphere in the clearing was charged with tension, a sense of time running out. Here, Noah said finally, his finger tracing a passage near the end of the journal. My father was attempting the ritual when he disappeared. He describes the process. The boundary must be anchored by conscious will, a mind that fully understands what exists beyond and chooses to stand against it. The lightning-struck pine serves as the focal point, its split trunk representing the gap between worlds. The ritual requires 5 elements: earth from the forest floor, water from a living source, fire freely given, air captured in breath, and finally, human awareness focused through absolute clarity of purpose. These elements combined at the moment of sundown, when the veil naturally thins, should be sufficient to seal the breach in theory. I will attempt it tonight alone. If I fail, the journal will find its way to someone who can complete what I've started. 5 elements, Marcus mused. That's easy enough. We have earth, we can get water from the stream, fire from our campfire. I don't think it's that simple, Sophie interrupted. Rituals like this are symbolic. The physical elements are just representations of deeper forces. Then what does it mean? Liv asked impatiently. Noah read the passage again. Earth from the forest floor. That seems straightforward enough. Water from a living source. The stream, probably. Fire freely given. Maybe a flame that's been ritually prepared or blessed somehow. Air captured in breath. That could mean focused breathing, like in meditation. And human awareness. That's us. Our consciousness directed towards sealing the breach. But which one of us? Emily asked quietly. It says a mind that fully understands what exists beyond. None of us have seen beyond the veil. A heavy silence fell over the group as they considered the implication. Jake has, Sophie said finally, turning to look at him. Whatever happened to him in the forest, whatever marked him, it created a connection. He's glimpsed what's on the other side. Jake's face paled. You want me to be the anchor? After just saying the entity is using me as a conduit? That connection could be repurposed, Sophie suggested. Instead of being a bridge for it to cross over, you could be a barrier preventing it from crossing. And what happens to Jake if he does this? Liv demanded. No one had an answer to that. We're getting ahead of ourselves, Noah decided. First, let's gather what we need for the ritual. We have until sundown to figure out the details. They spent the morning collecting the symbolic elements. Soil from the base of the lightning-struck pine for earth. Water from the nearby stream. Carried in Marcus's canteen, kindling for a new fire that would be ritually lit at sundown. Jake remained subdued, wrestling with the implications of his role in the ritual. The others treated him with a mixture of sympathy and wariness, never leaving him alone but maintaining a subtle distance. As noon approached, Noah felt a strange shift in the atmosphere, a heaviness as if the air itself had thickened. He looked up from the fire pit he was preparing to find Emily staring at him with an odd expression. What is it? He asked. Something's wrong, she replied softly. The forest has changed. Noah looked around. The clearing appeared the same as before, the massive split pine towering above them, their camp arranged beneath it, the surrounding forest peaceful in the midday sun. I don't see anything different, he said. Not see, Emily corrected. Feel. It's like we've moved somehow, even though we're in the same place. Noah was about to question her further when Liv called out from her tent. Hey, where did these come from? They gathered around as Liv emerged, holding something that made Noah's blood run cold, her camera equipment, which they had left behind at their original campsite when they first discovered the journal. "I didn't bring these with me," she said, confusion evident in her voice. Noah's gaze swept the clearing with new awareness. The arrangement of their camp had changed subtly. The tents were positioned exactly as they had been on their first night, before finding the journal, before the footprints, before everything. "Check your packs," he instructed urgently. They did, discovering all the items they'd left behind at their original camp: spare clothes, extra food, equipment they hadn't bothered to bring when they moved to the lightning-struck pine. "This is impossible," Marcus whispered, holding his carefully packed first aid kit that he definitely hadn't brought with them. "Unless—" Sophie looked up, realization dawning. "Unless we never actually left our first campsite." "What are you talking about?" Liv demanded. "We've been hiking through this forest for days." "Or we thought we were," Sophie countered. "What if the entity has been manipulating our perceptions, making us think we were traveling when we were actually going in circles, ending up right back where we started?" "No," Noah shook his head. "The lightning-struck pine. We couldn't have imagined that." "Look up," Emily said softly. They did. The massive tree above them was indeed split by lightning. But now that Noah really looked at it, he recognized it as the ancient pine at the edge of their original clearing, the one they had camped beneath on that first night before Jake found the journal. "This can't be real," Liv whispered, her journalist mind struggling to process the impossible. "Time," Marcus said suddenly. "We're losing time. Or it's being twisted somehow." Noah rushed to his pack, pulling out his father's journal. The pages were still there, the entries he'd been studying all morning. But something new had appeared on the final page, a warning written in his father's hand. "Time has no meaning here. The forest bends it, loops it, creates mirrors within mirrors. What you believe has been days may be moments or years. The entity feeds on confusion, on lost time and broken reality. Only absolute clarity of purpose can cut through the illusion." And below it, in a different hand, the spidery script of the original journal, a single line had been added. "One of you is already lost. One more will be taken before sundown. The rest will follow, unless the boundary is sealed today." Noah looked up from the journal to find the others watching him with frightened eyes. "What does it say?" Jake asked, his voice hoarse. Before Noah could answer, the journal fluttered in his hands, pages, turning of their own accord until they settled on a blank page. As they watched in horror, new words formed on the paper, the ink bleeding through as if from nowhere. Noah Carter. His name, written alone on the page, then underlined twice. Liv gasped. "What does that mean?" Noah stared at his name, a cold certainty settling in his gut. "It means I'm next." Noah stared at his name underlined in the journal, a chill spreading through him that had nothing to do with the forest air. The others had fallen silent, their eyes moving between Noah and the ominous writing. "It could be a trick," Marcus offered finally, his scientific mind still searching for rational explanations. "Another attempt to divide us." "Or a warning," Emily suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe you're in the most danger, Noah." Liv ran her hands through her hair, frustration and fear evident in every movement. "This is insane. We're trapped in some kind of... what? Time loop? Reality distortion? And now it's targeting Noah specifically?" She gestured wildly at their surroundings. "How do we fight something that can manipulate our perception of reality itself?" "We need a plan," Noah said firmly, closing the journal with deliberate care. He refused to let the entity see his fear, though it churned inside him like a storm. Standing around waiting for something to happen isn't an option. Jake had been unusually quiet, his face drawn with the constant internal struggle against whatever had marked him in the forest. Now he looked up, his eyes clearer than they had been in hours. "We should split up," he suggested. "Absolutely not," Liv countered immediately. "That's exactly what it wants." "Not to run," Jake clarified. "To solve this, we have two problems. finding a way out of these woods and understanding the entity enough to stop it. We should divide our efforts. Noah considered this. Jake's logic made sense, despite going against every horror movie rule. You're right, he decided. We're running in circles trying to do both at once. So some of us try to find an exit while others work on the ritual? Marcus asked. Noah nodded. I'll take a group to scout the perimeter, look for a way through whatever barrier is keeping us here. The rest stay and work on deciphering the journals completely, figure out exactly what my father was trying to do when he disappeared. Who goes where? Sophie asked. I'll lead the scouting group, Noah said. I need Liv's logic and Marcus's scientific mind with me. Jake, you stay here with Emily and Sophie. Your connection to the entity might provide insights, and Sophie's intuition about these things has been spot on so far. No one argued with the division, which surprised Noah. Perhaps they were all too exhausted to fight, or perhaps they recognized the sense in Jake's strategy. We'll head out now, Noah continued, checking his watch. It's just past noon. We have until sunset to either find a way out or prepare for the ritual. We'll return before dark, regardless of what we find. Take this, Sophie said, handing Noah a small cloth pouch she had quickly assembled. Inside were pine needles from the lightning-struck tree, a small stone from the clearing, and what looked like herbs she must have gathered earlier. For protection, she explained simply. Noah accepted it without comment, tucking it into his pocket. At this point, he wasn't going to dismiss anything that might help. Be careful, Emily told them, her eyes lingering on Noah. Remember what the journal said? It's targeting you specifically. I'll be fine, Noah assured her, with more confidence than he felt. We'll be back before dark. The three of them set off, Noah leading with Marcus and Liv close behind. They moved in the direction they believed would lead to the original trail, carefully marking trees as they passed to track their route. For the first hour, the forest seemed normal, peaceful even. Birds called overhead, sunlight dappled through the canopy, and a gentle breeze stirred the pine needles underfoot. It was hard to believe this same forest harbored something ancient and malevolent watching their every move. You think Jake will be okay? Liv asked as they walked. I'm still not convinced leaving him was a good idea. Sophie and Emily will keep an eye on him, Noah replied. And he's right, his connection to the entity might help them understand what we're dealing with. Marcus, who had been studying the trees as they passed, suddenly stopped. Hold up, he called. Look at this. Noah and Liv turned back. Marcus was pointing at a tree they had just passed. A tree that bore Noah's marking, a distinctive X carved into the bark. But that's impossible, Liv said. We've been walking in a straight line away from camp. And yet, Marcus gestured, to the marked tree. Here we are, crossing our own path. Noah felt that now familiar sense of dread creeping up his spine. Let's keep going, he decided. But change direction. Head west instead of north. They adjusted their course, moving perpendicular to their original path. Noah marked a new tree with a different symbol, a circle this time. They pressed on, the forest growing denser, the underbrush more difficult to navigate. After another half hour, Liv spotted it, a tree with Noah's circle marking. We're going in circles, she said, her voice tight with frustration. No matter which direction we choose. It's hurting us, Noah realized aloud. The forest itself is shifting, keeping us contained within a certain area. Marcus looked up at the sun, barely visible through the thick canopy. At least that's constant. We can navigate by it. Try to maintain a true course. They tried again, using the sun to hold a steady eastward direction. They moved faster now, with growing desperation, pushing through brambles and clambering over fallen logs. Sweat soaked through Noah's shirt despite the cool mountain air, his muscles burning with exertion. An hour later, they stumbled back into the clearing where they had left Jake, Emily, and Sophie. This is impossible, Liv gasped, bending over, with her hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath. We walked straight east for an hour. We should be miles from here. The clearing was empty, No sign of the others. Their tents remained where they had been set up, the remnants of their fire still smoldering, but Jake, Emily, and Sophie were nowhere to be seen. "Jake?" Noah called, his voice echoing unnaturally in the still air. "Emily? Sophie?" No response. "Maybe they went looking for supplies," Marcus suggested without much conviction. Noah approached the lightning-struck pine, drawn by some instinct he couldn't articulate. At its base, where they had buried his father's journal, the earth had been freshly disturbed. Kneeling, Noah found a piece of paper pinned to the ground with a small stone, a page torn from one of the journals. He picked it up, dread pooling in his stomach as he read the hastily scrawled message in Sophie's handwriting.
"Noah, Emily's connection to the entity is stronger than we realized."
Alone, isolated, believing her sacrifice had saved her friends completely, unaware that the entity had found another way. Noah placed the journal in a metal box, securing it with a padlock, unsure what else to do. He couldn't destroy it. Instinct told him that might only make things worse. He couldn't return to the forest. The terms of Emily's guardianship forbade their return. He was trapped in a terrible limbo, knowing the horror wasn't over, but powerless to end it. That night, as he finally succumbed to exhaustion after days, without proper sleep, Noah dreamed of Emily. She stood in the clearing by the lightning-struck pine, but changed somehow. Her eyes deeper, older, her movements no longer entirely human. In the dream, she looked directly at him, as if seeing him across the miles that separated them. "You brought it with you, Noah," she said, her voice simultaneously her own and not her own. "The boundary is maintained, but there are always cracks, always ways through for those patient enough to find them. I can hold it here mostly, but fragments escape. Whispers carry, influence spreads." Noah tried to speak, to apologize, to promise he would find a way to help her, but no sound emerged. Emily smiled, a sad expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Live well," she said, echoing her final words in the forest. "Live well and be vigilant, because it's watching, always watching. And someday, when you least expect it, when you've almost convinced yourself it was all a nightmare, you'll hear it again. Whispers in the dark." Noah woke with a strangled gasp, moonlight streaming through his bedroom window. For a moment, he thought he saw a shadow move across the wall, not cast by anything in the room, but flowing like liquid darkness, autonomous and aware. Then it was gone, if it had ever been there at all. But in the silence of his apartment, miles from the mountains, years from the safety of his previous life, Noah thought he heard it, just at the edge of perception, barely audible, whispers in the dark. The entity waited, and somewhere someone else would find a journal or hear a story, or feel a presence watching from just beyond the firelight. The cycle would continue, the influence would spread, tenuous but persistent. And in the forest, beside a lightning-struck pine made whole again, Emily performed her guardian's duties, maintaining a boundary already compromised, unaware that her sacrifice, while noble, had merely changed the form of their nightmare, not ended it. The entity had existed in the spaces between realities for millennia. It could wait a little longer. After all, curiosity was a powerful force, and humans were so very, very curious. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting. For you, just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, it would mean a lot.